This is a Sports Catastrophe production.
Hey there, how there, ho there. It's Jeff Godami welcoming you to another Sports Catastrophe on this day. And on this day, May 24th, 1986, the Montreal Canadiens won the Stanley Cup in one of the most shocking Stanley Cup wins in Montreal history. Some say the most shocking. But anyway, the 1986 Stanley Cup playoffs were huge. The 86 playoffs were the last time that the first round of the playoffs were best of 5. By 1987, the next playoffs, it would be best of 7. And it actually was magical because you got to remember, Pat LaFontaine's goal for the Islanders, the Easter Epic, would not have happened if the format was best of 5 because Washington would have won in 5 games. So anyhow, Montreal would win their 23rd Stanley Cup in history. Not their last, but their second last. They would take on the Calgary Flames. Montreal had such a great playoff run. Since 1956, they were 17-1 in Stanley Cup Finals. The only blunder, yes, it was the Leafs in 1967. I did not know that. Anyway, so, by the way, Western Canada versus Eastern Canada. Canada must be really crapping their pants for this matchup. Anywho, so this was huge. So Montreal and Calgary were meeting in the finals, and this was the first time since 1983 that they went with the 2-2-1-1-1 playoff format, finals format. The previous 4 finals actually used the 2-3-2 format, which meant that if a game 5 would happen, it would be at that arena, and then 6 and 7 at the other arena. Montreal and Calgary actually met in a Stanley Cup before this. In 1924, when the Stanley Cup was basically a challenge between the NHL and the Western Hockey League. Montreal took down the Calgary Tigers. So anyway, Montreal had a path to the finals that was crazy. Patrick Roy coming out of freaking nowhere to steal the #1 spot from Doug Soltart and Steve Penny, and gave Montreal second place in the division. Calgary was second place in their division too. Montreal would sweep Boston in 3 games, creating chaos because Boston never seemed to get over the hump against Montreal, and it took 4 decades for Boston to finally beat Montreal in a playoff series. Well, not from 1986, but from 1988 they broke that mark. The good news for Montreal is that they didn't have to face the Adams winner, which was Quebec, because Hartford swept Quebec in a shocking 3-game series. Although it must be said that Quebec got their own back in 1987, taking down Hartford in the first round. However, in the division finals, it was epic. Hartford actually forced a Game 7 out of Montreal, and Claude Lemieux, a fellow rookie of Patrick Roy's, and the new hockey squeeze of Bill Lang, scored a key double overtime goal over the glove of Mike Liut. And if you watch the highlights, the French highlights, and you hear woo, that's the sound of Mario Tremblay, who was the color commentator at that time. And I believe Tremblay was still playing for Montreal, but he was hurt. But he was one of the color commentators when the Habs took on Hartford, and Richard Garneau was the play-by-play guy. Excuse me, I just sneezed. Anywho, so yeah, it was huge. It took me a long time to actually find English highlights of Claude Lemieux's double overtime goal. Well, the U.S. call, and then finally realizing CBC's call of Dick Irvin. Regardless, Calgary's second round series was much more famous than Montreal's. It went 7 games too, but that was, of course, the Steve Smith series, the Steve Smith game, April 30th, 1986, when Steve Smith somehow hit a clearing pass off of his own goalie, Grant Fuhr's foot, and into the net. That was the winning goal. Now, Perry Bergeron was credited with that goal. Some say it was Lanny McDonald, but no, Perry Barrison, as the last Flame to touch it, was the guy who did it. And of course, that was huge because Calgary took care of Edmonton, and lo and behold, we would soon learn that that was the only time Edmonton missed the Cup in 5 years. They had 4 out of 5. Or 5 out of 7 if you want to count the 1990 Stanley Cup. Calgary would take on St. Louis in an epic conference final, which saw the Monday Night Miracle in Game 6, in which St. Louis was out of it, seemingly out of it, but won in overtime. Doug Wickenheiser. Man, he produced for St. Louis, but not for Montreal. Montreal just had to waste that number 1 pick on Wickenheiser, not Denny Savard. Winnipeg could have done it too, but they chose Dave Babbage. Or was it Lukowicz? Can't remember. But anyway, Montreal's conference final was less epic, as it were. Well, Calgary won 7, but Montreal did have a Game 3 performance by Mr. Waugh, or as the Rangers call him, Rua. Or Roy. Well, the English language guys couldn't pronounce his last name, which was Waugh. Of course, his 10 saves in Game 3 were epic, because that, Claude Lemieux again, he scored on the first shot of overtime for Montreal in Game 3 at Madison Square Garden, and it went in. Montreal won in 5 games, took on Calgary, and the finals was just a cluster. Calgary started off big, winning 5-2, with goals by John Tonelli, Jim Poplitsky, Dan Quinn, Lanny McDonald, and Dougie Riceborough. Montreal got goals from Mats Naslund and Chris Chelios. Waugh lost to Mike Ferdinand, and it looked like Calgary had Montreal beat. I mean, after all, Calgary beat the 86 Oilers, who a lot of people said were the best of the bunch. Anyway, Game 2 happened. And Montreal and Calgary were battling tooth and nail. Tonelli scored in the first period, and then Paul Reinhart, Kitchener, I think Kitchener Rangers, made it 2-0. However, goals by Gaston Gingras and David Malley made it 2-2, and then overtime came. It was nail biting and all that. Well, if you like short overtimes, this was it for you. As the puck went to Mike McPhee, McPhee decided to fake the shot, gave it to Brian Skrudland, and boom, he puts it in the net. 9 seconds. Bunch of fans were trying to buy food for overtime, and then they're like, wait a minute, they just scored. Montreal just scored 9 seconds. Still an NHL record to this day. Playoff record to this day. That was a game that was huge. And then they went to the Forum, where Montreal won both games 3 and 4. Game 3 saw goals by Mats Naslund, Bobby Smith, Naslund again, Bob Gainey, and Gel Daline. Calgary scored Joel Mullen, Joe Otto, and Lanny scored. So Montreal wins 5-3. Which was crazy because Mike Ferdinand actually was in net for the first period, gave up 4 goals, and then was yanked for Reggie Lemelin. And then Game 4 was an epic. The shots were 24-15 for Montreal. Surprised that Montreal held Calgary to 15 shots on goal. Only 1 goal. And yes, Bill, Claude Lemieux was the goal scorer. It's 10 for the playoffs. Amazing how Claude Lemieux came out of freaking nowhere. Well, he was a rookie, but he made it 1-0. And then Game 5 happened. It was an epic battle. Gingras scored to make it 1-0. And then early in the second period, Steve Bozak tied it at 1. But Brian Skrudland got his second of the playoffs and second of the finals, making it 2-1. The third period was huge because Rick Green, not Red Green, Rick Green and Bobby Smith scored to make it 4-1, and it looked like Montreal was going to go into cruise control. Not so fast. Steve Bozak and Joe Mullen scored late, and it was 4-3 Montreal. However, Waugh on in the last few seconds, and Montreal won one of the most unlikely Stanley Cups in history, 19, winning it. Which was the big thing about Calgary is that they only had 3 players on the team that had been to the finals before. Nick Fatiou, number 22, played for the 79 Rangers. Doug Riseborough, number 8, and Kitchener. I think Kitchener Ranger, Doug Riseborough. I might mistake myself. I don't think Riseborough played for the Rangers. Guelph. Yeah, he was picked in the 74 draft, but was he a Kitchener Ranger? Yes, he was a Kitchener Ranger. Roseboro played 1 year for Kitchener. I guess I got confused. So fellow Kitchener Ranger, his 5th finals appearance, because he played for the Habs dynasty from 76 to 79. And John Tonelli played for the Islanders from 1980 to 1984. So he was part of the Islanders dynasty, and then he got traded. So anyway, Montreal, lots of players. Lots of rookies, though. There were a lot of rookies. All that. The fact is, only 5 players went to the Stanley Cup Finals on the Habs roster. Lucien Debois, number 27, played for the 79 Rangers. Bob Gainey, well, it's Bob Gainey. He played for the 70s. The teams of the 70s. Larry Robinson, Kitchener, was there too. Bobby Smith played for the 81 North Stars in the finals. And Mario Tremblay. Yeah, I guess Mario Tremblay was still an active player. So, anyway. So, anyway, the cup would be engraved. Bob Gainey would get the cup. And it was like, you gotta look at all these guys. These unknown guys. And a lot of them were rookies. So, the setters who got their name on the cup were Bobby Smith, Guy Carbonneau, Lucien Debois, Mike McPhee, Mike Lalore, and Brian Skrudland. Wingers were Bob Gainey, David Malley, Ryan Walter, Serge Boisvert, there was a guy, Mario Tremblay, Shel Dahlin, Matt Naslund, Steve Rooney, not Penny, but Steve Rooney, Chris Nyland, Claude Lemieux, and Stéphane Richer. Defensemen were Rick Green, Tom Curvers. Leaf fans would curse the name Tom Curvers a couple years later. Larry Robinson, Chris Chelios, Craig Ludwig, Peter Sabotek, Gaston Gingras, and John Kordick. Yes, John Kordick played for that team. And the goalies who got their name with the cup, Waugh and Doug Soltart. I feel bad for Steve Penny. But what's weird is that Lalore, Skrudland, Boisvert, Richer, Gingras, Kordick, and Waugh all won the AHL championship with Sherbrooke. The AHL championship. So yeah, it was huge and all that. Tom Curvers didn't even play in the playoffs, but because of the rules at the time that if you play half the regular season, you got your name on the cup. He was included on the Stanley Cup. Mario Tremblay also had that situation. He played 56 games in the regular season, but he couldn't play in the playoffs, and was color commentator on the French thing, on SRC. They gave there were 4 names that were not engraved on the Stanley Cup, but including team picture. Steve Penny dressed for 30, played only 18 games. Sergio Momesso played only 24 games. They were actually injured and did not get the 41 games needed to get their name on the cup. Randy Busick also did not qualify for the cup. Anyway. So, yeah, the Habs had 11 rookies on their squad. Mike McPhee, Stéphane Richer, Brian Skrudland, Mike Lalore, Patrick Waugh, Steve Rooney, John Kordick, Claude Lemieux, David Malley, Sergio Momesso, and Randy Busick. And the funny thing was that the Habs only made one major trade, and it was for nothing. Montreal didn't really trade their guys. It was just shocking how those guys won the cup. Many lineup changes were with their AHL team in Sherbrooke. And Sean Perron was the 12th rookie head coach to win the Stanley Cup. In fact, he was the last rookie coach to coach the whole season. Yes, Dan Bylsma won the cup as a rookie coach in 2009, but he was a mid-season replacement, so that doesn't count. Of course, there was a Montreal riot causing $1 million in damage. Fuck. ESPN, this was the first time in the first of 3 consecutive seasons ESPN would do the Cup Finals. And this was the last time that CBC and CTV actually had English language rights of the Cup Finals being shared. For games 1 and 2, CBC had the rights to air them locally in Montreal and Calgary, and CTV broadcast to the rest of the country. Which would mean that if you were in Southern Ontario like myself, you would have to watch it on CTV, not CBC. CBC would have the exclusive rights to televise 3, 4, and 5. Nationally, CTV was going, if Game 7 happened, CTV and CBC would have simultaneously televised it. They did that in 1971, if memory serves me right. I know that. After the season, CTV pulled the plug, and the rights package was given to Global. It was weird that Channel 6 would have the games. But yeah, that's what happens. Yep, Richard Gardner, Jules Tremblay, and Mario Tremblay were on the SRC thing. CTV had Dan Kelly, Ron Roche, and Brad Park. CBC had, Bob Cole and Don Whitman sharing the play-by-play calls. And all that. And ESPN had Sam Rosen broadcast the first few games, and then Ken Wilson, the guy who was famous for his blues broadcast, to it. So yeah, so it was an unlikely Stanley Cup for Montreal in 1986. And, great to them. Edmonton, would come back to win the next 2 Stanley Cups. Calgary and Montreal would tangle in 1989 when Calgary gained revenge on Montreal by not only winning the Stanley Cup, but winning it on Forum ice. Lanny McDonald's goal moment will never be forgotten. And you can take that to the bank. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.